It's ambitious. It's supported by political will. And it focuses on the development and delivery of a nature recovery network throughout the city. I would call it, I'd like to think that it's really innovative. It's a nature recovery, nature infrastructure project. And it's also just common sense, I think. And we'll focus pretty much, I think I was given 10 minutes and I have a terrible history of overrunning. We have an existing environmental strategy 20 to 25, and in there, Appendix A is an environmental policy statement, protect and enhance biodiversity and habitat. That's actually a pretty good starting place. I'm a great believer in the power of policy. It provides succinct, accessible statements that are signals to organisations and the organisations connected. And so I started with thinking, okay, how do we really frame a new policy? And I appreciate this is all words, and the next slide is about what we're actually going to do. So I proposed create a city where biodiversity can recover and thrive, halt species decline, and increase species diversity and abundance by 2030. And I thought, God, there's no wiggle room in that. Let's see how that flies. And I took that through an internal consultation process with political leaders and officers, the people who are charged with delivering this, and the response was very clear. Yes, that is the right thing to be aiming for. And so what are we aiming for? Well, a nature recovery network, I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted, but it knits together existing wildlife sites, the Sweetbriar Meadows, we have some fantastic habitat already in Norwich. And that acts as a kind of incubator space. And by providing corridors and stepping stones, we can encourage the growth of biodiversity throughout the city. So the Nature Recovery Network, I think, is a really communicable kind of approach to doing that. So existing wildlife sites, and here's an interesting thing. We have lots of parkland too, under pretty intensive management. One of the things that came out quite strongly in the public consultation was a response to our proposal to investigate rewilding some of our parkland. Of course, we'll always make sure that there's enough amenity space. There surely has to be a happy medium here. And actually, that's been very positively received. And, I don't want to set any hairs running. We'll be engaging with people about every specific project. Most of our parklands have friends of groups. They're the first people we'll talk to. But I think very much along the lines of agroforestry, I'm really excited about the idea of kind of food production, but with biodiversity really taking taking priority. That's the focus here. So it's existing wildlife sites, it's creating new habitat, interconnecting nature corridors, picking up significant green spaces, highway verges, green spaces around buildings that are currently just mowed, and infilling with smaller opportunities, our back gardens, our front gardens, planters. We want to collaborate, we need the cooperation of everybody, business community, the institutions of Norwich, existing green groups. I'd like to think we have most of you on our database. Residents. We're looking for biodiversity champions, citizen scientists. And in a couple of slides' time, how can we move this forward? Biodiversity Net Gain is also one of those providers of funds. Biodiversity Net Gain should be achieved on the development site. But where that isn't possible, we'll very happily take developers' money to contribute to developing some of our other opportunities, some of our other green spaces. We can use that income from developers to do good things with biodiversity. And our planning team will be producing our own planning policy around biodiversity net gain, not just relying on central government signals. And that comes in at the end of 2023. Right, I think the writing's getting so small I can hardly see it now. Baselining and measurement. We need to work out how to baseline. We have an exercise to talk to some of our academic colleagues about how to do that properly. And we will be choosing indicator species, and ecologists have ways of doing this. We will be taking a baseline of biodiversity so we can measure the progress of our efforts. Yes, improve well-being through improved access to nature, lots of learning and educational opportunities, mitigations, the connection between biodiversity and climate, reduce heat, drought, flood risk, improve air quality, lots of positives there. Nature-based solutions, the phrase we're using, grow the green economy with regards to promoting those nature-based solutions. I don't think we know what that looks like yet, but this is something we set off on a path, and generally part of our drive towards more of a circular economy, and circularizing resources, using materials sustainably, very much fits with some other thinking that we're putting together. And I've mentioned baseline and measurement. So we put all of that together. I try and keep strategy documents as minimal as possible. I think we got it into about 12 pages. It's accessible, I hope. We listened, we put that out for public consultation for the whole of August. Really good response. We're just working through those now. We also put it out on Get Talking Norwich during August. And my team's now looking at whether the draft of the strategy needs any tweaking. I think the addition of food, of species and plants that produce food is quite an interesting one. And we're aiming for that strategy and the action plan that goes with it to be adopted by Cabinet in November. And then there is the action plan takes that on to deliver the Nature Recovery Network. Within 3 months, we'll be talking to, we call them strategic partners, those organisations that manage significant nature assets in Norwich. Businesses, residents will be holding a big biodiversity workshop event in the spring in the building opposite in the Forum. Alignment with how the council manages its own parks and open spaces. Will be consolidating what the Nature Recovery Network map for Norwich looks like and the development plan, and then we'll get on with making the changes needed to join things up. So we'd very much like you to get involved. This is something we can all engage with. We've set up the email address biodiversity@norwich.gov.uk. Please reach out. And Get Talking Norwich is the engagement platform. If you're somebody who uses the web, then that's a really good way to keep an eye on what we're doing. I think that's me. Got any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Phil. So this is your chance to ask questions of the Council and their exciting new biodiversity strategy and nature recovery network. Any questions? Okay, so just because 3 people have already asked a question, just before we go to any of them, is there anyone who hasn't yet asked a question that would like to... Yes, the lady down here.
Hey, thank you very much, Phil. Really interesting talk. You mentioned one thing I'd just like to ask you a bit more about, which is you said you were excited about food production as part of taking priority in the biodiversity ideas that you have here. Could you say a little bit more about that, where you've got to with it? Because it sounds exciting to me too.
Well,
Just come to the
yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's something we haven't explored in great detail, but it seems so. We have cost of living crisis. We are also producing a food security policy. We're looking for join up. So it's actually a friend of mine, Zoe, came around for dinner and said, okay, you need to know about, if you're writing a biodiversity strategy, you need to know about agroforestry, and here's some websites to look at. So this is about developing species of trees, essentially, shrubs and bushes that potentially create food according to their habitat, whether they're acid or alkaline soil. It's just putting the right species in the right places and hopefully producing some food along with encouraging nature recovery. But nature recovery is the emphasis. It's we're not looking at creating commercial orchards in our parkland, So it's about getting that balance right, That's the outline plan. I guess it's a permaculture thing.
Oh, spent 6 years teaching permaculture, music to my ears. Anyone else quickly who hasn't asked a question? Otherwise, really happy to take those who have previously. Gentleman here and then the lady at the back.
Thanks very much. You mentioned, I was quite interested in the comment you made about the changes or the proposals that may bring about some changes in planning locally. Because picking up one of the points that Sandra made was about the fact that, there is still this lack of intent in terms of actually using the opportunity to put renewables on rooftops, for example, and that kind of thing. And I can't understand why more planning authorities don't start doing that. Now, I obviously, I'm not really expecting you to go into detail with the change, because I've been in local government, I know how it works. But is there anything you could say about that? Because it does seem to me that one of the things that is still missing is a much more serious intent on the part of people who are responsible for our development, particularly through local councils and other things. There's a lack still, I think, of intent to actually operate in that area.
I mean, I think council hat off, I do feel that intent. What seems so obvious to a room full of people like us, and probably a great percentage of the general public, is, doesn't seem to be translated into hard requirement. What I do know about Norwich City Council is we do have what we call a supplementary planning policy that requires 10% of energy for new buildings to be produced from renewable energy. So that's something that is within the gift of local authorities. And it was actually the London Borough of Merton, we're going back to about 1996, that brought that in. They were trailblazers with that. And a number of progressive local authorities took that up, and Norwich is one of them, I think I'm right in saying. And I know this because I used to work at UEA, and I had responsibility for getting planning permissions for buildings, and that was always one of our requirements. So I think we do have that. But nationally, yeah, of course, we feel that lack of serious intent and forward movement. So that's something that through our through the appropriate channels we can lobby for as a council. But yes, so we do have it locally, but we also recognise that there's more to do with the national picture.
Lady at the back. Blue scarf.
You talked about the policy and you also talked about the objectives. But the bit in between, you referred to there being an action plan that's going to be approved. But could you say a bit more about that? Because I didn't hear very much about the bit in between the policy and
Sure.
the objectives.
Yes, we thank you for bringing that up. I'll talk about the action plan in about 20 seconds' time, but I just want to talk about how the process that enables us to put together a good quality action plan. We recognise the urgency, and we're trying to get to the point where we start doing things as quickly as possible. But at the same time, we try and listen at every possible stage. So what I thought the right thing to do was write a strategy so that there's and consult on that. So there's a really clear signal of what we intend to do. And actually, in an ideal world, we would then go away, write an action plan, and then come back and consult on that, because we need to listen to feedback on the strategy before we put the action plan together. And what that does is it puts several more months of delay into the process of actually getting started. So I went for a bit of a compromise, which was get the strategy out for consultation, but also ask some questions around the action plan in that consultation exercise. And I hope that's worked well, because we did get some good feedback on the evolving action plan. And now let's talk about what that action plan is. The action plan is a 3-year ahead horizon that has a very specific set of actions that pretty much in the first 6 to 9 months post-November is very much about engagement, spatial planning, project planning, making action plans for individual sites, and then for the time going forward from that is about actually spades in grounds, making change. That said, within that first 9 months, we have some quite early stage actions around our parks and open spaces. So it's not that we'll be waiting 9 months before anything happens. There will be some pretty immediate action. So the short version is there is a detailed action plan. We felt that we needed to listen before we put that together. That is now coming together and will be published in November for the adoption by Cabinet on the 16th of November. So there is a detailed action plan with very specific tasks, with very specific timelines.
Hi, I'm just going to make a comment, if that's okay, rather than a question, and I'll be really brief because I know you need to move on with the agenda. My name's Ruth, and I work for Northcombe Waveney Mind. I'm here, a colleague was due to be here today and couldn't make it because of COVID, and I just promised her that I would, well, on my own behalf as well, give a plug to our project, which is called Sustain, which is about climate anxiety. And so I just wondered if I could just take a moment just to tell you a little bit about that, which is that although we offer support around well-being and we use some lovely spaces in Norwich to do that, to help people to engage in nature, we've also got this quite pioneering new project happening around supporting people around their concerns around climate. So for anyone who's interested or has family or friends who might be interested to come along to one of our climate cafes or our course, there's some mauve-coloured brochures, well, flyers, up at the back there. And also if there are any organisations here that would like to be involved in some of our sort of future opportunities for things that we'd like to do around this subject, then that would be great. And I've got my 11-year-old here being very patient, waiting for me to finish. So I hope that that's a little bit of information about what we're doing, and then I'll let her go and we'll head off.
And I think there's a session booked in the forum very soon. That's my understanding, but I'm no doubt it's on the website. Yes, yeah.
Hi, my name's Caroline. I set up Norwich Swift Network 2 years ago now, looking after the Swifts around the city. And one of my main concerns about, well, my motivations for doing that was because we're losing so many of the nest sites. And one of the things that I thought about at the time was that the council has a huge role to play in guiding people how to look after their buildings so that they can also, you know, so Swifts can live with us because they have been doing so for so many thousands of years. And I was wondering how your action plan interfaces with subcontractors, people doing all the refurbishments of council-owned properties, that kind of thing, and how quickly you can roll that out so that you can look after swifts, house martins, starlings, house sparrows. All of these are on the red list now, and it's an easy win, something we can do very, very quickly to stop the rapid decline of these birds. Thanks.
No, thank you, and nice to...
Nice to make contact.
Yeah, hello. So the strategy very much requires alignment with council operations, and there's no caveat to limit that. So we would immediately think council operations in parks and open spaces, but actually the way we maintain buildings absolutely is one of those alignments that's needed. Actually, I was just talking with my wife yesterday. She said, well, I was brought up in Suffolk and there used to be house martins everywhere. Actually, this was this morning. So, well, I think it's PVC soffits that have, brought about an end to that. So, yes, so there is a requirement to align. There's also something else that's going on, which is the development of what I'd call an environmental management system. And that's a really good discipline for an organisation to have, and it's my team's job to implement this at the council. And what that would mean is, if there was a damage to habitat, that would be raised, and there'll be training required to make this happen. And it'll take probably a few months or a year to get this in place. But if habitat, especially red list habitat, has been destroyed or interfered with, then that's in that system, that's an environmental incident. It's reportable internally, and it brings a discipline to an organisation to respond and to do things differently. So I actually bought a pallet of